So what is a Widowmaker rim? Well, it's the old style of rim where you had a free-floating center. These are tube-type tires. And if you didn't get the outer ring set just right, when you inflated it, that whole thing could explode up into your face, removing your face, probably the rest of your head too. Thus the name, Widowmaker. At the heart of this build is this bad boy. It's part of an old three-piece rim with two outer beads. It would have been a dangerous son of a gun to put together back in the day. Dating back to what I suspect is the 1920s, I saw some potential in this, and I realized it would make a darn cool coffee table if you just could figure out how to do it. So we did. The process started by cleaning up some spalted birch that I had up in the racks. It had been exposed to a bit of the weather, had some water stains on it, and was a little uneven, kind of rough sawn. But a few passes with the planer, and I had myself some pretty planks. Next, we had to pass them over the table saw and true up the edges. This was a little difficult because the boards themselves were kind of twisted. But we just winged it, and to be quite honest, got them close enough. After the final cut was made, I stacked all of them together to make sure that what I had was wide enough to make the entire tabletop. And guess what? It wasn't. Plan B. When something doesn't go right, you have two options. You can fix it so no one ever saw that it was a problem, or you can make it a feature and no one can miss it. We went with the latter. I needed it wider. Rather than trying to find some birch and splicing it in there, I let my helper pick out a contrasting wood. He picked cherry, so that's what we used. In between each of my birch planks, I put a chunk of cherry. Overall, that gave me the extra 2 inches that I was going to need in order to span the entire width and breadth of my table. I liked it. Shay was a huge fan. So I think that this particular problem kind of became an asset, even if it was a touch inconvenient. Here you can also see me dinking around with snotty glue. No one likes snotty glue. After some drying and a little sanding, it was time to actually rough cut the table. So I took some careful measurements of the Widowmaker rim center, and I made up my own pinwheel center marking gauge, which is basically just a plank of wood with a hole drilled in it that I could stick a pencil through, and a nail that I could tap into a mark I'd made in the dead center of the table. And round and round we go, and you've got a perfectly marked tabletop. Next, it was time to rough cut the top, and it was quite a bit for my crappy old jigsaw to handle. With a bit of muscle power and one broken blade, we managed to get through it, eventually. Now this is oversized. Not only am I cutting on the outside of the line, but the line itself was slightly larger than what I wanted the finished piece. The idea here is to get it as close as possible, but do not go undersized. You can always cut more off, but no matter how many times you cut it, it's going to be too short if the first cut's too short. I had done a preliminary flattening sanding before I cut the circle. But why flatten all that extra wood if you're just going to cut it off anyways? So it was really just to get it so it didn't rock around. Once I'd roughed it out, I went back through, starting with, I believe it was an 80 grit, and then going to a 120 or a 150. I approached it from all angles, even going across the grain, in order to help flatten the board out. The final sanding, of course, all went with the grain to minimize the impact of the scratches from the belt sander. It's just one of those things. And yeah, fine, rage that I'm using a dust mask. I do have the dust collector running, and it's pulling all the dust into the table saw. You just really can't see that. Now the reason for that close cut. I've got a straight cutting bit on the router. The goal is to not take anywhere near a full depth cut on it, to really just sort of skim the outer edge. I didn't quite hit it that perfectly, and I had to take 2 bites at it because it was just too much to push that bit through the board in one shot. I was asking to break it, and if I broke it, then what would I do?
You think it's going to fit the first try? Of course not.
Yay! Guess what I got to do again? It's fine though. I really, to be honest, expected it. You want to sneak up on this fit. You can't put it back. In this view, you can clearly see how I am taking a half-depth cut and, measuring twice. All right, success. This time it fit. It had a funny offset, and that was due to a ridge inside the rim. I also took the opportunity to finish sand the top side. A smooth surface wasn't required on the bottom. Because the birch I was using was spalted, and I knew it needed an epoxy top coat, otherwise it would never be hard enough. So here I am mixing it up, and I start by dribbling it in all the areas that I suspect are going to soak up huge amounts of epoxy. I then brushed it out as if it was paint over the top of the rest of the table and let it soak in. The application of some heat will pop all the bubbles, and then I brush over any areas that looked a little dry. Now here comes the part that's kind of different from how everybody else does it. I don't want a thick, glossy top coat layer, and epoxy is expensive. So I used an old laminate sample card to essentially squeegee the extra epoxy off so that I could use it on the other side. A spike board allows me to put the wet side of epoxy down. This is obviously the top face. The finished face is coming up here. That allows the bottom side to dry, and I can do both layers at the same time. It's how you might face coat both sides of a board with paint in one shot, because you really don't care if you see the speckle marks on the back. Now again, squeegeeing off the extra epoxy. And you can see it gets pretty dirty doing this, but I really don't care. The epoxy is not my finished top coat. What I need is it to soak into the wood and harden, giving that soft, punky wood a nice glass hard finish, and I'll then spray a top coat, usually a satin, because I just don't care for the thick, waxy gloss look. My final step is another one that I've really never seen anybody else do. Once I squeegeed up as much as I could, I got a clean rag and I essentially scrubbed all the rest of the surface off so that it was no longer wet to the touch. I don't want any hardened epoxy left on top. This is why I go through those strange epoxy steps that I do that sometimes drive people crazy. I hate that thick, sort of gelatinous pool of the bar top epoxy look, but I need on tables like this a hard surface. And you've got decent cherry and punky birch and decent birch and knots and pits. It's a very uneven finish. So by squeegeeing it off, I leave only epoxy in the places that it's needed, places that are soft, places that are low, stuff like that. Then when I wipe it down, I take all the surface off, and in so doing, I create a hard, durable wood underlayment. I then sand that and spray it like you see here with a satin finish, and I get a durable top that can stand up to writing and yet doesn't have that thick, thick look. Take a moment, jump over to the legs here. This is an old, very heavy despite what it looks like, bar stool base. And that is going to become the base of our table. Sort of a blending of mediums here. After using Scotch-Brite pad to polish up the chrome, I'm taping it off. I want to repaint the black legs. There's some scratches and I don't like the depth of the finish. So I'm going to use that Scotch-Brite to give it some tooth, then spray it. Then I'm going to spray what I sprayed with that same satin of the tabletop. Satin is better than gloss, guys. It hides everything. You can use cheap store brand spray paint, but just don't skimp on the clear coats. Use the good stuff. It's much better. Yeah, untaping took a lot longer than it should have. I don't know, wrap the thing with paper next time. That was a dumb idea. After I had it unwrapped, I clear coated the base. Again, satin and good stuff. You can get a heck of a finish out of a rattle can as long as you're using the good stuff. Oh, my favorite part, putting it all together. Took a little finesse to orient the imperfections of the table with the imperfections of the rim and get everything just the way I wanted it. But I did it. I measured the circumference of the table and then found a spacing pattern that divided it evenly. Then I used a broken piece of tape measure to properly space my holes. Now, the first time around, I did not sink the screws. I left the heads out. That allowed me to sort of snug it up, kind of like you might tighten the spokes of a bicycle, keeping everything straight and even and not twisting everything out of shape before I even got a chance to line it up. When it came to hardware and attaching it to the tabletop, I knew what I wanted, but I had to kind of approach it from a roundabout way. I wanted something that gave the viewer sort of a reminiscence of a wheel hub, as if you might actually be looking at a wooden wheel that would be bolted on. But I wanted them to look old. So I got some carriage bolts, I ground off the zinc coating and the stamping, and then I put a series of facets on them, randomly, before I got the torch out and heated them up. This process then blues them. You can watch the bolt head here turn a jet black color. I then dipped it in some water to cool it off. I know the water's green. There's nothing special about it. I just had some old nasty water in the shop. This gives them a beautiful finish, but it's not done yet. There you can really see the facets I put on there. Random facets. The next step is a little hand sanding. And by polishing off the high spots, you leave this wonderfully almost hammered finish, but you didn't have to hammer it. Nothing crazy here. Measure, center, mark, drill. That's it. Pilot from the back, drill from the top. Keeps me from getting any tear out. Then I put in the carriage bolts and tapped them gently into place so they didn't move around on me. Then I set the base on it. Last step was to hit those fresh bolts with a little bit of satin spray. Protects them and everything blends together. Here you can really see the final effect with the bolts. They do look hammered. It's one of my favorite parts of the table. So what do I think of the finished build? Well, to be honest, I'm not a fan of the base, though I've had many other people say that they really like the two of them together. For whatever reason, it doesn't work for me. I do dig that organic texture of the rim, however. Boy, you can feel the age. This was a perfect use for something that really wasn't classically decorative as yard art or useful for any other purpose. It was destined for scrap. Now it's cool. We have the table for sale in our booth, and I'm not actually asking all that much for it. I don't know, like $85 or something. But it was a fun build, and I liked how it turned out. We're working on some other cool projects around here, including a faux mantle made from some fluted portions salvaged from an old table pulled out of the dump, and another one of our patented tire mirrors. I don't actually see anybody else making these. Stay tuned, maybe click on some of those videos you see, and thanks for watching.